You did everything right, or at least everything that was supposed to work. You showed up, you learned the rules, you became reliable, and now something feels off. Because outside, your career still looks stable, but inside, it suddenly feels replaceable. So here's the quiet question most people avoid. What happens when the thing you spent 20 years becoming stops needing you? It doesn't arrive as a dramatic collapse. It's subtler than that. A tool someone mentions casually. A task that used to take hours, now done in seconds. You just notice a small shift. Like the ground didn't crack, but it's no longer solid either. At work, everything still functions. Emails, meetings, the usual routines. But there's a strange background noise now. A thought that wasn't there before. Is this still valuable? Not the title, not the company, you. For years, value was simple. You got better. You became faster, sharper, more experienced. Experience used to compound. Now it sometimes compresses. What took a decade to learn can be approximated in seconds by something that never gets tired. And that's not just uncomfortable. It's disorienting because your identity wasn't built on randomness. It was built on effort. You still know more than ever, but it feels like it matters less than before. Here's where the real tension begins. It's not actually about losing your job. Not yet. It's about losing the story that made your effort feel safe. The story said, if you invest enough time, you become irreplaceable. But now something doesn't quite fit because you're not being replaced by someone better. You're being challenged by something different. You don't feel obsolete, but you also don't feel secure. There's a moment many people recognize but rarely say out loud, and it performs surprisingly well. Not fear exactly, more like recalibration. It's not that your knowledge disappeared, it's that its exclusivity did. The more effort you invested in becoming efficient, the more exposed you are. You trained yourself to remove friction. Now something removes you from the equation entirely. Some ignore it. They double down on the familiar. More work, more control. Others swing the opposite direction. They panic, but neither reaction actually resolves the tension. It's the gap between who you believed you were becoming and the reality that no longer guarantees that path. That's what hurts. And yet, there's another way to look at this. Not as replacement, but as exposure. Processes that looked complex, but were mostly structured repetition. Those things feel personal when you spent years mastering them. But they were always closer to systems than identity. So the question changes. Not, will I be replaced? But something more precise. What part of what I do was never truly mine to begin with? That's a harder question, and a more useful one. Because beneath the skills, there was always something else. The way you notice patterns others miss, the way you frame a problem before solving it, the way you sense what matters before it's obvious. Those things are quieter, less measurable, harder to automate, but also harder to trust, because you didn't build your identity around them. What's easiest to prove is becoming less valuable. What's hardest to prove might be the only thing that remains. This is where many people get stuck. They keep trying to defend the old ground. They ask, how do I compete? What am I without the parts that can be replicated? That question doesn't have a quick answer. It's not a strategy. It's a process of seeing. You start noticing where you rely on scripts, where your thinking becomes automatic, and not judging it, just seeing it clearly. Because clarity does something interesting. It removes illusion, not by trying to outrun the change, but by repositioning yourself in relation to it. There's a quieter kind of stability available here, not the old promise of you'll always be needed. You're defined by how you see, decide, and adapt when tools change. That doesn't feel as comforting, because it's less predictable, but it's also more resilient. For years, you built a career inside a stable structure. Now the structure moves. How do I stay oriented, even when the structure itself keeps changing? It's something you learn to live with, a different kind of confidence. I can still think, even when the ground shifts. You did spend 20 years building something real, but maybe it wasn't building what you thought. Maybe it wasn't just a role or a set of skills. Maybe it was building the capacity to face this exact moment. And the question that remains isn't simple. It doesn't close neatly. If what you built can change this fast, what part of you is still yours? The answer doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in moments where you realize you're no longer reacting as quickly, but you're seeing more clearly. In conversations where the pace is fast, but you're the one who notices what's actually being said underneath. That's not inefficiency, that's depth. But depth doesn't compete well in environments optimized for speed. And that's why this feels like loss. Because the game you learned to play is no longer the dominant one, and the new one hasn't fully revealed its rules yet. So you're left in between, not fully belonging to the old model, not fully aligned with the new one. That space feels unstable, but it's also where something new can form, not by rebuilding the same identity faster, but by allowing it to reorganize around something deeper, the ability to orient others, to clarify, to reduce noise, to make sense of complexity without rushing through it. That doesn't look impressive in a system that rewards speed, but it lasts longer, and over time, it becomes more relevant than it first appears, because systems that optimize only for speed tend to lose context, and context is where experience still matters, not as accumulated knowledge alone, but as pattern recognition across time. The ability to pause before reacting, to choose direction instead of defaulting to speed. That's not something AI replaces easily, because it's not just about output, it's about orientation. And orientation doesn't disappear when tools change. It becomes more important, even if it takes time to recognize it. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough, more like a slow adjustment. You're still doing similar things, but you're relating to them differently. Less urgency, more precision. Less need to prove, more awareness of what actually matters. The external signals don't guide you as much anymore, and that can feel disorienting at first, because you're used to knowing where you stand. Now the markers are less clear. There's no obvious ladder, no linear progression, just a series of decisions that only make sense in hindsight. And that requires a different kind of trust, not certainty, but willingness to move without full clarity. That's uncomfortable because it removes the illusion of control, but it also removes the illusion you needed control in the first place. And that's where something opens up, not as a strategy, but as space to think, to notice, to understand before acting. And that changes the quality of your decisions. They become slower, but more accurate, less reactive, more aligned with reality. And over time, that becomes its own form of relevance.